when you find something that's impossible, but actually after showing it, after doing the research, you show actually it is possible, it makes a revolution. There is a shlok in Bhagavad Gita, Desha Kalecha Patrecha. You want to know the time, place and the context. Otherwise, you truly don't understand the meaning of it, even for as a guidebook for Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha.
What do you think is one major Indian historical narrative that you think will be rewritten in the next decade with new understanding?
All of these, they started with this assumption that Mahabharata happened at the time of Kali Yuga, which is correct. But Kali Yuga began at 3102 BC, which is... If you start studying history of India or Itihas of India, you start understanding the history and Itihas of the world.
What is the strongest evidence for the fact that Ramayana happened? Namaste Nilesh ji, thank you so much for making the time. I understand you've had a very busy day. Great to host you on Bharat Varta.
Great to be on your show.
So like many others, I discovered you through the Ranveer show where you spoke about Mahabharata, Ramayana and most importantly, some of the scientific evidence to show that it actually happened, right? Why do you think that episode on Mahabharata went viral? And especially, why do you think there was so much engagement from the youth?
Yeah, do you mean a specific episode like a Ranveer's episode?
Yeah.
So Ranveer's episode, I would say it's a combination of two. Okay, humorously, I will say two great guys talking. Okay, Ranveer is actually extremely brilliant person.
Right.
Okay, I mean, I'm saying this totally on a different count, meaning there is that different level of brilliance, not like to please somebody kind of thing. So some of the conversations, so he comes out very innocent also in the sense that he's clueless at certain times. But some of the things he can think on the feet, so to say, as he's listening and processing is actually amazing. I don't know if audience caught that, probably not. But I would say Ranveer is relatively popular. Right. So that was one factor of it. And for that audience, the kind of stuff, because he has called many other people before, like when did Mahabharata war happen, when did Ramayana happen and so on. And even those might have done good numbers. But I can tell you those good numbers are because of Ranveer and not because of the guest.
Right.
Because frankly, if you're talking of doing something scientific, just to give you a background, if you're talking Mahabharata, let's say. So there are, in the last 400 years, about 130 plus different researchers who have come up with those many different dates. And some people just repeat the dates and that's fine. Not because I want to show how I'm superior or something, or not even for a disrespect to any other, but frankly, the quality of research that is being done by out of those 140 plus, I would say 120 plus folks is actually disgusting.
Oh, that's a strong word.
Very strong word. Very pathetic. Like, you know, I mean, I would have a compassion towards that guy. I would say that research should not be seen by the folks who are interested in Mahabharata, either from India or outside. It is not even a kindergarten level stuff.
Wow.
That's also very strong, but that's a fact.
Right.
Now, I again don't think necessarily the audience would have picked it up, because audience also has their level of it. But it was because they intuitively, I would say, all of us understand what science is.
Right.
We may make mistakes. Intuitively, we also understand what is logical reasoning, although we may not always do it properly. We meaning majority of the people.
Right.
So they may not do it properly, but when they hear it, they say, this makes sense. This makes sense. And that's what was happening. And I would say that is about my research. And I'm not saying I'm the only one. In last 140 years, there are about 6 people, 5 plus people who I would say, I mean, I sit on their shoulders, and that's why I could do it.
Right. Yeah. So from listening to your podcasts and just reading about the work that you have done, I feel there's a logical coherence to how you put the narrative together, which I find missing in a bunch of the others you mentioned, right? They make statements and those claims are not substantiated with sufficient evidence.
In fact, I would say zero evidence. what happens is, to a lay person, it feels like they are giving you the evidence. But this is like, think of a movie with a multiple takes. Finally, the guys spoke properly. What happens is, in many cases, I mean, we can even classify them, but I will say most cases, what happens is, they already have a date in mind for Mahabharata. Now, that may come from many sources. Just to give you a classification, let's say you look at 140. About half of them are simply driven by Mahabharata happened at the time of Kali Yuga, and a traditional belief. It's a belief. There is no basis whatsoever, and it's actually a wrong belief that Kali Yuga began in 3102 BC. Just on these two statements, they begin. Then they, in a cherry picking fashion, they said, hey, is there any year around this range that for which I can match the Mahabharata evidence? And they find a couple of things and they say, let's go with it.
Right.
They will go to even such an extent that even if they find a date, there are many dates. I'll tell you the 3000 BC business, just as a like illustration for the audience. 3009, 3067, 3126, 3102, 3101, 3136, 3137, 3126, 3139, 3140, 3143 BC, 3162 BC. These are all BC. All of these, they started with this assumption that Mahabharata happened at the time of Kali Yuga, which is correct. But Kali Yuga began at 3102 BC, which is decisively false and wrong. So to a novice or to a lay person, I would say, it feels like, the person said something and provided the evidence, but actually it's a cherry-picked evidence and it's done backwards. Because the evidence matched for a certain year, that person is claiming that year and saying that that is a year of Mahabharata. But there is no scientific thought whatsoever. There is no logical reasoning scheme. They don't understand empiricism other than that cherry-picked thing. So that's why I said initially it's a very pathetic type of research.
Right. What got you to question those dates and specifically that approach?
Good. No, that's a great question. So what happened? I didn't start my research by questioning anyone. In fact, it was like a novice person's curiosity. Since you have listened to my other things, like suddenly when I was doing my master's in Canada,
right.
And I had some time, so I went to Mahabharata, and just out of fun curiosity, I was reading it. And I saw the whole sets of series of astronomy observations, like in Bhishma Parva, chapter 2 and 3. And one particular one caught my curiosity. And so I started working on it. Now, while I was working on it, I tried to see who else has solved that problem. And I saw that nobody has solved the problem, like Arundhati going ahead of Vasishtha. But those out of 50-60% of the folks out of this 140 who were claiming that they have figured out the timing of Mahabharata using astronomy, and this is astronomy observation, why were they not using it? Because they couldn't even make sense out of it. So still no problem, because then fast forward from 1994 to 2009, when finally I figure out, I solved that problem, like Arundhati walking out of Vasishtha, I figured out a time.
For the audience who may not be familiar with your work, can you just introduce that problem?
Yeah, so the problem is just Mahabharata has close to or more than 300 plus astronomy descriptions. Now, what is the problem? When did the Mahabharata war happen? That's the problem I'm trying to solve. And what is my hypothesis? Now, this hypothesis, you put it kind of afterwards because I got stuck with the problem, and to solve that, I'm putting hypothesis. What is my hypothesis? That Arundhati walking ahead of Vasishtha, which has the two stars in the Saptarshi clusters, is this something that was literally seen by the eyes? And so I said yes. So my hypothesis is Mahabharata astronomy descriptions are descriptions of Mahabharata times. Which means that at the time of Mahabharata, Arundhati must be seen walking ahead of Vasishtha. Today, it's not. And those two stars, but also the star cluster is so solid, meaning they don't move much. The proper motions are very, very less. So you can go back 1,000 years, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. Still, Vasishtha is walking ahead if you go back from our times. That itself was a shock. Shock meaning a pleasant shock, which means out of 140, practically 95% plus of the claims are wrong.
Eliminated.
Because Arundhati is not walking. But it took me 15 years to figure out, can Arundhati or does or did Arundhati ever walk ahead of Vasishtha in the past? And if it's yes, when? Like what time interval or what particular year? And then, of course, the next question would be what made it go ahead, which is sort of a why, the root cause. But the first two are important. Did it walk and when? And that time period comes out after 15 years of thing, is that for simplicity, 10,000 BC to 4,500 BC. That's the time period. Now that itself, the fact that after 4,500 BC, which is to say last 6,500 years, it's not walking ahead, which means anyone claiming Mahabharata war happening in the last 6,500 years is basically falsified by that Arundhati Vasishtha.
Right.
So that's the background.
Right.
So then when that happened, then I said, okay, is this just a coincidence? Do I find additional evidence which points me into the same time range? And then, so it took me 15 years to solve one shlok. But then it took me 3-4 months to take additional 300 and put them like solving the pieces of jigsaw puzzle and crossword puzzle. So, yeah. And then another year to write the book.
You say that there are 300 plus such descriptions of the stars and so on. Yeah. Why pick only this, right? I mean, why not the remaining 299 or maybe more? They could also perhaps, lead you to different dates, maybe?
No, they don't lead to different dates. But your question is, why did I pick this for my initial search? I mean, why I'm stuck with this for 15 years and why did I not try the others? Of course, I tried the other. But your question is great for this reason. That takes us back to what is science, what kind of evidence we are looking for. See, for example, we are in search of truth. So 2 plus 2 equal to 4 is also truth. I mean, it's a fact, right? 3 plus 3 is equal to 6 is a fact. But in science, or especially if you are trying to get to some tough problem, you are not interested in those trivial kind of facts. You are interested in what science will call crucial evidence, which is to say, prima facie, when you read something or you hear something or you experiment something and you are shocked by the outcome, like what is your technical, science background?
I'm an engineer.
Yeah. So you will be fine, absolutely. So think of atomic model, like Dalton is putting some model, then J.J. Thomson puts another model of like a pudding, like a laddu with a pudding. Then Rutherford. So Rutherford is sending those alpha gamma rays. Right. And when that ray comes back, he gives a metaphor. He says like you're shooting at a piece of paper and as if the bullet rebounded to you. That's a shock, right? It didn't go through the paper. That kind of thing, what we call it like a exciting evidence, meaning prima facie you think that's not going to happen, but actually it happens. So in case of Arundhati Vasishtha, that's the kind of thing. Those stars are so stable pairs that you don't expect them to change the position so that like one guy is now ahead of the other.
Right.
Now that was my background knowledge of Saptarshi and little bit of astronomy I knew.
Right.
So in science, if you want to make a revolution, you want to pick the evidence, which is not easy. So to answer your question, let's say, it says, Jupiter was near Shravana Nakshatra. Now it's going to come there every 12 years. Okay. Buddha, Mercury, was near Uttara Ashada. Well, it's going to happen every year once. Buddha is going to make a complete trip. So what is the point of checking that? That just happens. It's a trivially true thing that Buddha can be close to Uttara Ashada. But Arundhati walking ahead of Vasishtha is practically impossible. Just to give you a history of it, it has a 140-year history. So S.B. Dikshit, one of the greatest Indian astronomer and a world astronomer, by the way. I consider him the greatest astronomer of the world, by the way. When that astronomy software did not exist, the kind of stuff he has done is immense. So he says, I don't understand how this will be possible. Lokmanya Tilak used this as an example to see how the additions might have been made to Mahabharata. Bharatacharya C.V. Vaidya, he's given the title. He said this is something that somebody later on must have inserted. Bharat Ratna Panduranga Vaman Kane says this is impossible in the very order of nature. Astronomy speak, this is not possible. So this is a very kind of evidence that people think it's not possible.
Completely unique.
I said I have a trust in the words of Vyasa. Why Vyasa would write something that is next to impossible? So if, I could have been searching for this for additional 15 years and we won't have this podcast. But the point is, when you find something that's impossible, but Actually, after showing it, after doing the research, you show actually it is possible. It makes a revolution.
Right.
Because the nature of that evidence is such that I can say it decisively falsifies the 95% of the claim. I cannot say that with saying Jupiter is near Shravan, because if somebody wants Jupiter in a Shravan, they can get it every 12 years. You know what I mean, right? This is not the case here.
Right. How do you go about solving it? What was the...
Yeah. So, have you heard the name Karl Popper? Sir Karl Popper, the best philosopher of science, as far as the Western world is concerned. So his definition, he says, if you have a problem, you want to solve it. If you want to solve it, what to do? This is funny answer. He says, try solving it. So what happens is, in trying to solve it, actually you start understanding what the problem is, because you think it's a problem. I want Arundhati ahead of Vasishtha. But then the question is, what does it mean to say that Arundhati is ahead of Vasishtha? So I'll say, say this is north. So Arundhati is north of Vasishtha, and Arundhati is also to the east of Vasishtha. Okay, so this is east and also north. This is north and this is east. So now what is the possibility? First thing is, they can be north-south together, and now it is going like this can be ahead. Another possibility is they go like this. You follow? So now that is ahead.
Right.
So those are the two possibilities.
You mean like horizontally and vertically?
You got it. Right. You got it, right? So as a declination direction and right ascension direction. So that's what I tried. Now, this is 1994. Yeah. Softwares, we had the DOS version of softwares and whatnot, and softwares were very low resolution. Yeah. So actually I went to physics labs and got the old astronomy catalogs and doing manual calculations. Then actually I got the softwares, but the problem was, actually I could have figured out long time ago, but the software had a low resolution. So I made it a simplified problem, that if the particular calculation between Arundhati and Vasishtha, if that number becomes negative, Arundhati is walking ahead of Vasishtha. Correct. And what happened is, actually the old softwares I was using, the number will go to 0 but not negative. And do you know why that was happening? Because of low resolution.
Oh, it was not calculating further.
The decimal place precision was not there. So in a way I had hit the solution possibly 97, 98, but it was not going below 0. So I cannot claim it is going.
Wait to catch up.
So then therefore I had to wait for another 10 years to 2009.
Right.
Yeah. So this is not possible. This is not possible. So what is possible? And these two were not the reasons why they went ahead. It is actually the precession of the Earth's axis. So the pole point is changing. And because the pole point is changing, the relative positions of these two stars as they go around the pole point change. And that's what caused this Arundhati ahead of Vasishtha.
Right. And once you found that, did you find other pieces of evidence that kind of supports the actual date?
Yeah, that's the great story, So then my immediate, again, as a researcher, you get excited when you get the solution, but you have to be your toughest critic, your own toughest critic. So I said, okay, that's how an honest person should do research. So I'm saying, okay, I got this, but could this be a coincidence? So I said, what else I can get that also points me to the same direction? And that's a Bhishma Nirvana evidence. Quickly, again, this could be fun for our audience. Bhishma fell down in the battle on the 10th day. And you know the story, he's lying on the bed of Sharashaya, bed of arrows for the day of winter solstice. Again, there was a problem. Out of this 140, practically I will say everyone except Nilesh Oak. I will also tell you, I also accepted their argument prima facie. Right. Everyone was saying that Bhishma was on the bed of arrows for 58 days because they took one cherry-picked evidence from the Mahabharata text. And I have no reason to doubt them. Like, why would somebody lie, So I was also trying to fit for this, and it was not matching, because I could say that 10,000 to 4,500 BC, it will not match. So I said, what's happening? So then when you start studying, actually I started reading Mahabharata again, and I found 58 is not the correct number. Actually, Bhishma had to be on the bed of arrows for more than 95 days. And then I will not make astronomy calculated complications, but 195 days from 10th day plus 10 days, 105 days. So it's from the day of winter solstice to first day of Mahabharata war, there is a minimum period of 3.5 months. Right. Okay. And that 3.5 months astronomy shift, if you look at the lunar months of Margashirsha and all, it says minimum of 7,000 years ago. Now remember, 4500 BC, that's 6500 years ago. This says you have to go back more than 7000.
Right.
I'm saying bingo.
Okay.
Other piece of evidence is taking me there. I'll quickly say the third piece. This I learned lot later. Even after I wrote the book, it came to me.
Okay.
Not at that time. So total of 300, and they all will point to that 5561 BC. But now in retrospect, what I know, and I'm glad I didn't know at that time, because it would have taken me a long time. There are 8 descriptions of Mars related to the positions with respect to nakshatra at the time. And just for a minute, just you remove Arundhati Vasishtha. You say, assume like Arundhati Vasishtha evidence does not exist in Mahabharata. Bhishma Nirvana evidence doesn't exist in Mahabharata. It would have taken longer time to figure out the year. But if you just take those 8 pieces of evidence, descriptions of Mars from the Mahabharata text, it will also take you to 5561 BC and no other year. So these previous 2 pieces give me the bracket. So right. Bhishma Nirvana basically told me it has to be between 7000 BC and 5000 BC.
Right.
Still it's an interval. But the Mars evidence will take me to specific year.
Right. So what is the strongest criticism of your work?
The strongest or the intelligent, you mean?
Well, I would say, let's say the most intelligent something that made you think, okay, perhaps, I need to kind of investigate this a little more.
So that came multiple ones. I don't know there is a one, but there was one engineer, another engineer. We are engineers talking to each other, he is no more. He passed away at his 83 age. Prabhakar Fadnis. Okay. And he was Indian guy, but of course living in California. And so he actually read my book and gave me multiple pieces. Okay, so I'll not go into the detail because they may not be boring to people. But the evidence that he gave, and so I accepted. Like even one time my translation was wrong.
Right.
And it was not my translation. And I'm saying this because there are these people who only know Sanskrit and they criticize me. It's utter nonsense, because what they don't know is, other than out of 300 verses, maybe 300 verses of Mahabharata and 600 references of Ramayana, only one I have translated myself. All other translations I have taken ready-made from other Sanskrit experts. But they don't know that, so they think I have translated it wrong.
Right.
So that's the problem. So what happens is, this particular translation, I had taken it from a Gita Press and some other translation. Instead of in front of him, front of Yudhishthira, that is the correct translation. The wrong translation by Gita Press and few other Sanskrit experts is that they were behind him. They meaning the planets were behind him. So I'm not a Sanskrit expert, so I took that translation. Still, it was appropriate for my evidence. So he said, "Hey, that says in front of Yudhishthira. Do you know what it did?" So I said, "Yeah, my mistake. Me kalpa. So that's right." And I said, "Hey, still it doesn't change anything. In fact, I realize how precise are Vyasa's observations, because the time of the observation is also given, which is in the morning. And at that time, on that day, the last day of the Mahabharata war, those 3 planets are actually in the east direction, which is in front of Yudhishthira and not behind Yudhishthira. So there were many such things that good inputs came, the good criticism. And every time, touch wood, every time, thankfully, gratefully, they led to my theory, my claim becoming stronger. Now, you ask the strongest. If you see in the public domain, social media domain, there are absolutely pathetic individuals, and I like them, by the way, because they become my marketing team. Many people come to know of my research through them. So I want them to continue their nonsense. But the point is, I would love, and these are from prestigious institutions.
Right.
They are like IIM, MBAs, IIT, and American universities, PhD and whatnot. So I love it because they can be so pathetic in spite of that. But if the criticism is truly stronger in the sense of useful meaning, I want people to be brutal about me. Actually, right in 2011, when I published the book, I say literally, metaphorically, tear my book to pieces, shred it, and show me where I'm wrong. So to answer your question, that kind of critique has come, and that has made my claim and theory stronger. But the other people who are in the public domain and trying to make a name for themselves, it's sad that that is not adding anything to the discussion. Actually, sometimes it confuses the ordinary people, which is also fine, fine by me.
So oftentimes when Western let's say, researchers look at our own research, right? There seems to be like an apples oranges sort of a dichotomy. I mean, like a difference, I would say, right? Because there's a very fundamental difference, let's say, at the epistemological level itself, or the approach itself, in terms of how one views things. If we go back to our ancients, they believed in both Apta Pramana and Shastra Pramana, right? So if you look at the rishis descriptions, you mention the certain descriptions of, let's say, how Mars was and so on, right? They're accurate, but they're one person's deep vision on how things were. Now, this explaining this concept to a Western mind is impossible, right? They cannot grasp these things, and they simply label it as, let's say, non-scientific, for example. Right? But again, at the same time, a few inquiring minds on that side cannot grasp the fact that, hey, we had, let's say, pi figured out, right? We had all of these, distances figured out to the last, degree of calculation, right? How do we resolve this?
Okay, if you are asking the Western mind, I'll tell you, Indology, the folks, Western Indologist, okay, that's a bunch of very incompetent people, okay? And you say that's a very strong statement. I'll add the universities. University of Chicago, University of Berkeley, Columbia University, Harvard University, Oxford, Cambridge. I want to provoke them, frankly, and they can come here and we can have a debate, third chair.
Amazing.
Third chair. They will not come. I'm doing this for those many years. Have you heard Raju Malhotra's name?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Raju Malhotra challenges them all the time. They don't come. His subjects are different, but they don't come. Because I lived in America 35 years, Indology, that is like, how do you say, the way it works out here, for most part, in humanities and archaeology and whatnot. The bright people are not necessarily going. There will be some exceptions always, like somebody wanted to be archaeologist and he goes there. Indology, somebody wanted to do it. Mostly not. They are not the bright people. Okay, I'm not trying to put them down. That's a reality. Even say Ayurveda is at my heart. But what happens with a few exceptions? You can relate to that. In medicine world of India, first people want to go MBBS, then dentistry, then BHMS, then BMS. Isn't that true? I know many doctors in my family also has doctors. So therefore, the person who goes there may not be the brightest, unless the goes there because of passion. And the second thing is, the person goes there with a defeated mentality. Like, I did not get MBBS, I did not get dentistry, I did not get this, that. So that also has an effect. Same thing with this. But back to the Western mind. If the Western folks are from a STEM discipline, like engineers like you, me, and science, and not just a degree, but real curiosity, the jidnyasa we talk. I'll tell you, in my 35 years, I did not have a problem even once convincing the Western mind individual about my research. They get fascinated. Their eyes starts rolling in a positive way. When I give presentation, I don't even have a single example, I'll tell you. Now, when I go to Cambridge and Oxford and the Indology guys come, they just scoff and, like this, That's different, because they see, if somebody's sleeping, it's relatively okay to wake that person up. If somebody's pretending to be asleep, you cannot do anything. Yeah. But otherwise, Western mind, I'll tell you why. Possibly why it happens. Because they think science is their stuff. Like, they discovered science, just like they discovered India, and America. Right. They discovered science about 500 years ago, Copernican revolution. They built and they did phenomenal stuff. Like, all the technology we are seeing came into that revolution, industrial revolution. So they have a trust in science. Mine is, nobody can point fingers in, say, take Mahabharata, astronomy, 300, 600, 900 pieces of evidence. And if you take other 20 disciplines of science, I don't know what number to put, say 2000. They cannot point a finger at me even once saying this is not a scientific triangulation. So they understand it. They're fascinated. I will not mention the countries. I can, but in, say, Europe, we went and about 80 people in one country. 3 were Indians. This was this March. So I have no problem convincing a sincere mind anywhere, for that matter, even in India or this. And especially if they have a STEM background, like science, engineering, mathematics background, is a piece of cake.
Yeah. I think most important, as you mentioned, is to have an inquiring mind. and is to have the humility to recognize that, hey, maybe I don't know all of it, and new things may disprove me. But if you have an ideological belief,
bias,
then it's a bit of a problem.
Correct.
Because
Correct.
your entire edifice breaks and you have to rebuild this from scratch.
I will add something
This is
to
a
it.
painful process.
I will add something to it. And it's not about Western versus Eastern versus Indian mind. You have to have a Shraddha.
Correct.
Right? The trust. Which is to say, suppose the person doesn't understand astronomy, or even if they understand astronomy. I'll give you an example. TIFR PhD, a professor in America without the name. Okay? But I'll come to that. So, for example, like say I'm explaining, say, hey, look, Earth, sun is here and Earth is rotating around. Earth rotates around itself. I mean, if I say this, and then Earth's axis also has a precession motion like of 26,000 years. Now, because the person doesn't know astronomy, and he says, hey, because of that, where it points changes, and therefore the pole star changes. Now, these are some very basic facts of astronomy I'm saying. If the person starts questioning them, and they do, sometime when they're listening to me, they get stuck somewhere. Like, because the Dhruva story, right? Dhruva Tara.
Heard
That
of
one
Dhruva
Dhruva,
Tara,
he
yeah.
did a upasana of Vishnu and Narad Muni, if you know the story. And Narad Muni says, or Vishnu says, now I'll give you a position where no one will move you from that position.
Right.
Which is to say that Dhruva Tara doesn't move that fast in your lifetime or for 1,000 years. But that story is misunderstood, which is to say many people in the Indian context misunderstand, thinking Dhruva never changes. Dhruva Tara never changes. That they don't know. So when I tell them because of precession it changes, their eyes go like, what nonsense are you telling? Now, if they don't trust it, there is no point me going further and explaining anything to them. So there has to be, all that you said is absolutely right on the money. Plus there has to be a Shraddha. I mean, they have to have a trust that when I'm telling these basic definitions, I have no agenda to fool them.
Right.
So sometimes that happens. But if those boxes are checked, actually, even if the person doesn't understand astronomy, I'll tell you, this is not about understanding astronomy. This is about understanding scientific acumen, like Vijnana Buddhi. There are 11 elements. Or understanding logical reasoning. There are 16 elements. And then understanding Tantra Yukti. Like you said, ask me the question, how did I go about solving the problem? Like you try all possibilities, like this way, what else can happen? Exhaust yourself. There should be no possibility left.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I want to go on a bit of a tangent and ask you, why were our ancestors so obsessed with the stars?
I mean, it feels like they were obsessed, right? They were, if you're talking of the Indian guys, again, the whole worldwide the same. I'm not trying to say Indians were special in any way. They were special in many ways, for that matter. Maybe they were special because there were wonderful conditions here. For 250 million years you go back and there was no ice formation here, I mean, before that there possibly was, but a very healthy type of close to tropical, but not right on the tropical. Then last 50 million years, we are not even going that far, but I'm just saying it. So India comes and hits Asia, and then the Himalayas form. So it's protected from the cold winds and so on. So very fertile land. People can do little bit of work and sustain their needs, and they have a time for this. That's why it would have done it. So they were not obsessed. But what you will find is that the Indian sages, rishis, munis, whatever you want to call them, scientists, they were extremely pragmatic. I mean, they might have done it for the heck of it because they have a time, but they could relate to this. Like, so astronomy was important for agriculture, which is a very basic need. Then, so if you consider ways of prosperity, what are them? The agriculture and the business.
Yeah.
Like, so Vanijja, Krushi, Goraksha, Vanijja, Vaishya Karma Svabhavaja, that's how you make prosperity. So all of those, Krushi, Goraksha, Vanijja, all of them, navigation, commerce, needs astronomy. So that was their, if you want to call it, obsession. But what you will find is that it feels like obsession, so that's the right word, because when precision was required, it's amazing the kind of precision they went. Precision, like the decimal places, like they can have a pi value accurate to the 11th decimal place sometime when needed, and when not needed they will just go 2 decimal place, like you would remember 3.14,
right?
And other person says, oh, maybe they did not know how to calculate it. That's what the Western mind does many times. Indologists, they say, oh, they didn't know how to calculate. What nonsense. Do you know what is the precision in the Indian astronomy? And going back to 40,000 plus years, it is 1 divided by 3,438. You do the math. That's the kind of precision exists in all Indian astronomy texts.
Wonderful. I like your, mnemonic that you suggest, right? I mean, 7,000 years back for Mahabharata, 14,000 for Ramayana, and then 21,000 for, let's say,
Definitely
the Vedas.
before. Yeah.
Before.
More than 21,000 for Rigveda.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to complete that 7 to 70,000, then 28,000 years ago is when the current nakshatra system was formed. Formed meaning by people giving the names.
Right.
Just like we say, this is the new transportation code, that
Right.
kind of thing. 28,000. If you go back to 35,000, we find historical records, both astronomy evidence and terrestrial evidence that matches to Indian civilization, a king in Ikshvaku dynasty being there, Bruhadrath. And if you go to 42,000, 50,000, some of the geological changes that are happening are kind of listed, indirectly listed in our Indian text like Rigveda, which is to say Saraswati no longer a grand river and Sindhu becoming a grand river.
Right.
And you can go up to 70,000 years, and we have evidence in our text, but also evidence on the ground, like either geological, archaeology evidence, or it's all archaeology, by the way.
Right.
Celestial evidence.
So we spoke a fair bit about Mahabharata.
Yes.
What is the strongest evidence for the fact that Ramayana happened?
Well, happen is a different game. When it happened, I will take about stronger evidence. But that question is good. Like, what is the strongest evidence for that Ramayana happened? We can combine everything in it. What is the strongest evidence that Mahabharata happened, right? But let me turn that question and let me ask you, what is the strongest evidence that Alexander happened? What is the strongest evidence that Kalidas happened? What is the strongest evidence that Plato, Aristotle, Socrates happened?
Basically written by the Greek philosophers and so on and so forth.
So textual evidence.
Textual, yeah.
There is nothing more.
Yeah.
Right? I will say, so once people agree to that, for Alexander, Kalidas and Plato and Aristotle, there is no other empirical evidence, only a literary evidence, textual evidence. Once they agree to that, I will say there is more and superior and more scientific evidence for the fact that Rama happened and Krishna happened. In fact, many times what I say is all these other names that we took, they are more recent rather. Put them on one side and just put Rama and Krishna on the other side, or only one of the two. The balance tilts heavily on that side in terms of the evidence. So what happens? Naturally, I will never able to show that happened. How do you show what happened? Because what kind of evidence will be sufficient to you or satisfy you? That is the question. For some person, let's take an example. Kalidas. Like, do you believe in your subjective notion that Kalidas did happen? You know who Kalidas is?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, just from literary evidence, as you mentioned.
Correct,
right?
correct. But do you believe that he was really there was a guy Kalidas and he wrote Shakuntal and...
It could be, I don't know, maybe an amalgamation of like few characters that was,
Correct, that's possible.
Described as a person.
So let me ask you the other way then. No, that's a great answer, by the way. And that's the kind of discussion that need to happen. See, if there is no point me giving you the evidence, trying to guess what will satisfy you. That's why I'm asking the other way. Say, going beyond 1,000 years from today, and I'm just picking that for a deliberate reason. Think of a person in your subjective judgment notion. You are convinced. You may not have a proof, but yeah, that person happened. Who is that person? Besides Ram and Krishna, of course.
Quite difficult, actually. I mean, there are historical records, but
no, just the name first, and then I will ask you for the evidence. So, but in your subjective judgment, so when I asked Kalidas, you said, "Hey, possible," but it could be amalgamation of multiple personalities that might people think that was a Kalidas.
Right.
So 3 people coming together and writing Shakuntal. Or whatever, Raghu Vamsha, but we are thinking it's by one author.
Right.
That's a different problem.
Let's say if we were to index heavily on textual evidence and the fact that, these were important people and, in terms of the relevance and so on, maybe you could talk about religious leaders like, let's say, the Prophet Muhammad or
so take Muhammad or Jesus. Like in your subjective judgment, do you believe Jesus happened? Like just like a Kalidas, I'm not specific on any one
This
of them.
actually is a very important point because, I mentioned before we were recording as well, right?
Yeah,
That
and thank
a lot,
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, because you understand the epistemological and ontological problem here.
Right.
So you are a very unique person. Most of the folks don't understand this. I mean, they think I'm crazy when I'm asking these questions, right? So what? So once you tell me that somebody or anybody tells me that what evidence convinced them that Kalidas existed, Jesus existed. I'm not saying they did not exist. That's not an issue. Or them. Then I will tell them why Rama and Krishna existed using the same evidence. And I will say there is a bonus evidence that Kalidas doesn't have, Jesus doesn't have, Muhammad doesn't have.
Let's say if we were to go back and look at our own Indian kings and so on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Ashoka.
Yeah.
Or
Take Ashoka.
Chandragupta Maurya.
Take Ashoka.
Yeah.
Like, what is the evidence for Ashoka's existence?
I mean, you have various...
besides textual, let's say.
Yeah. There is archaeological evidence, right?
Such as?
I forget the name of the place, but then, I mean, if you go to, let's say, Kalinga or elsewhere, you would obviously like see certain inscriptions or...
There we go. But see, what is the inscription? In what way the inscription is different than this printed paper? Actually, it's not.
But if you were to carbon date some of the stuff and say that, hey, this was inscribed at a particular time in history.
Correct. So first thing, actually, but not to make that argument. So you cannot carbon date stone that is there. But suppose you found a way to date it, not carbon date it. Like there are ways. If it's buried, you can use thermoluminescence and stuff like that. So you found based on that, say 300 BC. But still, your first argument of Kalidasa comes in picture. Maybe some guy wanted to create a humor for folks 2,000 years after him. So he wrote it, there was this one guy, Ashoka, and he fought a big battle and he took to whatever, and he wrote it down there. Right? So ultimately, at some point, you have to trust the evidence. Do you understand?
Got it.
So now what happens is, again, I don't have any more evidence for Rama and Krishna other than that. But now I will tell you what bonus evidence is. Same as Arundhati Vasishtha. So a textual evidence which has a description of Rama, the whole Valmiki Ramayana, or textual evidence for Krishna, which is the whole Mahabharata and Harivansha and Bhagavad Puran. And it happens to have certain type of descriptions, just like Arundhati Vasishtha, that prima facie we think impossible. But then using our modern science, depending on appropriate discipline, we actually go back and we say, that actually did happen. Then I don't have a objective way of showing that therefore Krishna happened, because it could be a mischievous thing somebody might have done. But I at least know that there was a fellow at that time who did something mischievously. You understand? And he or she had a very advanced knowledge of astronomy. That much we can agree, is it not?
But we can also like triangulate from different sources, right? So let's say, I mean, if I were to make up a person, right? That is one person describing a certain character.
Yes.
But then if there were, let's say, numerous people describing someone approximately in a similar way or an event in a similar way, can we not say that, okay, you know what, there is more credibility on that?
Correct. Correct.
Which is why I mentioned the religious
but I'll give you a
leaders
risk of that. I'll give you two examples. Take Harry Potter. Or what is that detective, British detective?
Poirot.
No, the very famous
Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes, right? So now there are many books written on Sherlock Holmes, right? Or Harry Potter, books written on Harry Potter. Or Aryan invasion theory, which I call Aryan invasion nonsense, because that's what it is. But Aryan invasion theory, right now you go across and you will find, I will just give an easy number, at least 5,000 books written by 5,000 different academics around the world,
right,
on Aryan invasion theory. But it is actually a circular reasoning. They are quoting each other. They are thinking we the fools think it's an independent evidence. It is not. So Harry Potter is not an independent evidence. J.K. Rowling wrote it, and other person says, "Oh, that's such a beautiful work. Let me write something about it." So Harry Potter. Maybe 500 years from now, somebody writes on Harry Potter. That is not a guarantee that Harry Potter actually existed.
But they will write about Harry Potter as a fictional character. Right?
Great point. If that's the case, and if that therefore it does it, then just go 300 years before today. because that's when the Western influence came. William Jones came in 1785. There was a first Romance period. India is the mother of everything.
Right.
And then British had a control of all India, 1857. Now they have to make us official slave in not just body, but even mind and intellect. And that's when we are deracinated,
Right.
So if you go 300 years before or 500 years before, in the whole world, forget just India, you will not find any mention, anyone saying Krishna is a myth. Rama is a myth. So to your point, whereas Harry Potter, as you said correctly, people will say, yes, there was a J.K. Rowling and she wrote a mythical setup. Well, while some people will think, oh, no, that's not mythical. They were real. But some people will write. If you go back 300, 500 years ago, you will not find a single person. You will not find a single reference of saying the Krishna is just never happened. See, they have genealogies. I mean, who writes, of course, in Harry Potter you can do it, but who writes genealogies of fictional characters, not in the same book, in some other books. So there is a genealogy of Krishna before
Right.
Krishna, after Krishna. There is a genealogy of Pandavas before Pandavas, after Pandavas.
Right.
There is a genealogy of Rama, 64 prominent kings mentioned. And there is a genealogy of Rama afterwards, 28 kings down to Mahabharata times. Mahabharata text, now of course that can happen with Harry Potter too. Like let's say somebody writes another, I don't know who it is, Peter Potter or something, and they quote Harry Potter's, like Harry Potter's grandson or something. They can do that. But just as we have to give us some benefit of doubt,
Right.
So where is to say Rama's 28 descendants, Bhagwan Rama's 28 descendants, because Rama had two sons and those kingdoms were split into Ayodhya and Koshala. And so during the Mahabharata times, only their names are mentioned in two shlokas. It says Dirgha Yajna of Ayodhya and Bruhat Bal of Koshala fought from the Kaurava sides and they were killed by Pandava, like Abhimanyu and Satyaki or so. Other than those two shlokas, there is no reason for even mentioning them. But why are they mentioned? Because of the importance of Rama.
Right.
Relevant to that. So if you start putting this evidence, the kind of evidence you're saying, hey, that gives the weightage that they must have happened. Then I'm saying in case of Rama and Krishna, there is so much evidence out there. I mean, 10 hours of conversation is not enough.
Right.
Mahabharata warriors are extremely conversant with a Ramayana story.
Right. Yeah.
There is no mention of anything from Mahabharata into Ramayana. So you see the sequence the way it should be. And that's how it is.
Right. Some people believe that it's much more important to understand what Bhagwan Ram or Bhagwan Krishna said or stood for.
Yeah.
The values that were passed down from these folks. Right. Much less important to delve on these dates and events and the precise nature of some of these descriptions. That is kind of like missing the forest for the trees. Right.
Okay. No, I don't agree with all of it. Not the last part. But for most part, somebody says, hey, you know what? That's not my focus, or I don't even worry about it, or I don't even think it's important. What is important is the message that is given in Mahabharata and Ramayana. I will have no disagreement with that person. See, the objective of Ityasa, that is Dharmartha Kama Mokshanam Upadesha Samanvitam Purva Vruttam Katha Yuktam Ityasam Prachakshate. That's the idea. It's like a case study in our MBA courses, right? Case studies. So what exactly happened in a case study? In writing a case study, if they have camouflaged certain things, actually they do, because the true case is not totally given. They embellish it. They might add some complexity which really doesn't exist. Doesn't matter, because it's going to teach you about the business.
Correct.
To that extent, it's fine. Now, people go further and you say, hey, the date doesn't matter. Or what was something you said? Isn't it a waste of time or something you said at the end? Like, isn't it
much less important compared
less important also, I will understand, I will accept, because to that person, it can be less important. For me, I mean, I wouldn't say that that's the case for me, but I would be the most important thing for all it matters. Right? Everyone has a different taste. Like we have two things here in front of it. The Pune guy will say that's the best thing. Why fight?
Right.
Hey, you like it, you eat that. So to that extent is okay. But if somebody says, oh, but it doesn't matter, or it's even immaterial, or it is even foolish, or it's a waste of time to even find out when it happened, I would disagree. I would say that's utter nonsense. I'll tell you why. The Mahabharata itself gives the answer. Otherwise, what's the purpose for Vyasadeva to embed those 300 references. What is the purpose? Why they wasted time?
Right.
What is the purpose for Valmiki to do that?
Right.
And you will see, if you want to understand anything, there is a shlok in Bhagavad Gita, Desha Kalecha Patrecha. You want to know the time, place, and the context, the circumstances. Otherwise, you truly don't understand the meaning of it, even as a guidebook for Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. So I will make a case to them that if they don't know the time, they are actually not going to get the maximum that they want to extract out of it for their purposes, the value purposes. I'll give you an example. Bhishma, for the young boys, Chitravirya, Vichitravirya, he drove to Kashi from Hastinapur. And essentially in the war fought and took 2 daughters of the king of Kashi and brought them as wives for Chitravirya, Vichitravirya. Can we do that today? No. Which means the timing must be known. So that time, that was not an issue. That was considered an accepted practice among the kings. Not today. Which means you need to know the timing and how the things change. You will find the people of Ramayana times are more liberal than Mahabharata times. So if you want to truly study from the value...
Can you explain that a little more?
Yes. For example, in the Mahabharata times, you will see, again, there are fierce ladies and very brave ladies like Draupadi, Kunti and Gandhari and so on. But nobody has thought of putting Draupadi on the throne or Kunti on the throne. Like, the Dhritarashtra, the blind king and the Pandu. But they're always talking on the man as a king for most part. Not that there were no queens, like we know Vishpala from Rigveda times. Right. Whereas in Ramayana, when Ram is sent to Vanvas, Vasishtha suggests that, hey, what is that lady's name? Kaikai or Dashrath. If you want to send Rama to Vanvas, fine. But he says a Patni, wife is the Atma of a husband. And so let Rama go, but Sita can sit on the throne and rule it. You don't see that necessarily in Mahabharata. And you see many other such things. Very open, much more open society in Ramayana in comparison to this Mahabharata.
We briefly touched upon this whole AIT, right? Aryan invasion theory. And for us, like, I'm still old enough that we read it in our textbooks and we believed it to be the truth.
Yeah, I did not, but go on. Yeah.
Okay.
Even I read it first time in 5th grade.
Right.
And it didn't make sense to me. Not that I fight like, I thought it curious rather.
Right.
Because, the people wearing dhoti and plow on their shoulders and cows going ahead. That's the picture I had, in my book. And this is Aryan came from outside. Say, what are they talking? Not that I had any knowledge or something, but I found it interesting. I said, I didn't know that. But I did not believe it. I don't know why. Right. And then afterwards, after many years when I studied it, it didn't take me much. So there are 4 arguments and all arguments go against it. Right. So that's why I call it Aryan invasion nonsense. I have a keynote talk at IIT Chennai, Rajiv Malhotra Swadeshi Indology conference on this. Right. How to falsify AIT.
Yeah. No, there's significant research after that, convincingly disproving that. Right. Although, you will still find the odd geneticist or someone, making this claim that it's still valid and so on and so forth.
And on a very false evidence.
Right.
Like, do you remember any geneticist?
I don't know if you follow
David Reich, Narsi Narasimhan of Harvard. And then they had folks from India like Vasant Shinde and a few other guys, because we provided, we meaning the India provided the bodies, the DNA samples from Rakhi. It's a very, as far as the AIT argument is extremely lousy way, paper written in a very lousy way. I spent 3 hours at Harvard with Narsi Narasimhan. And finally, we were talking for 2 hours. Then my wife couldn't take it. She's a chartered accountant. They see everything black and white. She said, look, I'm his wife, but I'm looking at this very independently or unbiased way. I am hearing both of you and listening patiently. Every time he, meaning she's saying me, says something, he's giving a backup evidence. He looks at Narsi, she looks at Narsi and says, you are saying a lot of things, but you are not given a single piece of evidence in the last 2 hours. He said, ma'am, you are right, but still I don't agree with his theory. I wish I could have recorded that.
Right. But similar things, right? You look at Professor Danino's work on, let's say, the Saraswati River and so on. Now, these pieces have become apparent to us over time, right? So, what do you think is one major Indian historical narrative that you think will be rewritten in the next decade with new understanding?
Yeah. Well, it is, it is being written already. It's there out in the, through my talks, partly in my books. I have not written on a Saraswati yet, but the book is in the works. This is what the scenario would be. But because you mentioned Danino, let me mention that. You have read his Lost River?
I watched his lectures at IIT and so on.
Yeah. So Michel Danino has done a good work. But even I want to mention that point. Just take that as an opportunity. So we talked of ontology and epistemology. The other one we talk about is the emic approach and etic approach.
Right.
You're familiar? So etic is an outsider, and academia tries to convince us that etic is outsider, therefore objective. Utter nonsense. They don't even understand. Sometimes that's true, but that is not the case in case of Indology. I'm willing to stand on the stand against anyone. Now, therefore,
That's also one of the points that Rajivji mentions, the emic and the etic, where you have to bias both together to have a more holistic view of things.
Correct. Right? I want to go beyond even what Rajiv says. So he says, don't just etic. He respects that. Like, there are some good things we can get. And I will tell you, the Western Indologists or Western folks in general, if they decide to do something, they are amazingly meticulous about what they do. In fact, I just laugh. I can use their research and then use it for my purposes. We'll talk of River Saraswati in a minute.
Right.
But see, what happens is, Michel Danino also, he does a good job how in our social memory there is a mention of Saraswati. But when it comes to antiquity of River Saraswati, what Michel Danino claims in his Lost River is a disaster. He's our guy, in a way, but it's a disaster. For him, the grand Saraswati of Rigveda and then therefore afterwards Ramayana, Mahabharata does not even begin until 8000 BC. If you get a chance, read his chapter 2 of his book Lost River. Whereas the reality is based on I'm answering your question. You said what will be rewritten? Based on all the available evidence of last 45, 35 years, basically is going to rewrite the story of Saraswati. Therefore, it is going to rewrite the story of Rigveda. With my work, it's going to rewrite the story of Mahabharata, Ramayana. And once you put this Mahabharata in 5561 and Ramayana 12,209 BC, many people, many Purana researchers, and I don't do much Purana research other than Bhagavad Puran, they come and tell me, thank you, Nilesh, because now our Puranic research becomes very easy. We were struggling to put those kings in different places, and now they fit reasonably well, not completely well, because there are gaps.
Right. Yeah. You talk about some 15 to 20 tests, right? It's a process of triangulation to arrive at a certain, let's say a chronology or figure out the exact dates of events and characters and so on. Like, for the audience, could you just very briefly talk about, what you mean by that?
So I wouldn't call even 15. Let's talk about 5 or so. At least would be easy for them to keep in mind. Between two theories, this one theory takes more evidence into account compared to this other theory, which is inferior. This theory gives more precise predictions than this theory. So let's call it T2 and T1. T2 is better than T1. T2 makes predictions like Arundhati, Vasishtha, Bhishma, Nirvana for more than 95 days, which are not even thought out by the T1, meaning not that the individual did not think, that the hypothesis of that theory did not even allow that person to come up with this thing. Next, number 4. T2, a better theory, like my theory, my claim, makes predictions that are not been made by any other theory. That's number 4. And if you have to take 5 points, even that number 4 itself is a amazing progress. But 5, some of those predictions that are made, which cannot be even made by the other one, come out to be true. And this is not my list, by the way. I should give a credit where it is due. It is a list made by Sir Karl Popper,
right,
in his Conjectures and Refutations.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I want to zoom out a little bit. As someone who investigates these texts very closely, what lessons do you draw from the Ramayana or the Mahabharata that is absolutely relevant for us in present times? Because you have a different lens also of looking at these texts, right? When you see them, you see them in a more practical way, I would say. So some lessons for the audience.
So first thing I would say, a very generic lessons to anyone, like why somebody should even consider doing this if they have a passion for this. Think of a rubber band, and if we stretch it, and in a rubber band we know it never comes back to its original position. So like when you do something like this, and some of the things that you will not even articulate in words, but that happened to your brain, that happens to your personality, that happens to your worldview. It totally changes something. Which is to say, take Arundhati Vasishtha, not again technicality. And I said, in retrospect, what is it? Was I a fool? Now that I successful, it's a different story. But was I a fool to trust a statement in some archaic text, thinking that this must be correct, and spent 15 years of my life, of course I was doing other things, but on this thing. And because it's successful, now I am of course happy. So like, are you willing to do it? And which means like wherever you stumble, there lies your treasure. But are you going to take that stumble seriously? This is impossible, you think, but you work on it.
Right.
The other lesson.
I want to pause there and talk about that a little further, right? Anytime someone does something original, like out of the, let's say, mainstream, they often get a lot of criticism.
Yes.
And it can frustrate people. It can often shake your own belief in yourself.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel like giving up at certain points, and what kept you going?
Okay, both questions. No, I never felt at any point giving up, because criticism did not bother me for this reason, because I always felt in my Shraddha, of course, that the Vyasa is on my side. Okay, so I'm not trying to take a statement of Bill Clinton from his autobiography or biography and try to test it. I will not trust that. But here Vyasa, and of course, the support of colleagues meaning they're not official colleagues, but you meet on the way. You might have heard Rupa Bhati name from me. One time she said, because even I did not have this Shraddha, so I said, this may be, we were discussing, and he said, this may be embellishments, I'm saying. Just trying to find the explanation for one of the evidence. And do you know what she says? She says, no, that won't be embellishments. I say, what do you mean? Or why do you say that? She says, Vyasa won't waste his time just even putting a useless embellishment. So take it literally, she was saying, that astronomy evidence, some other out of 300 evidence. And that was a good advice from her. So what happens is, as a step by step, your confidence in the words of Vyasa, in confidence in yourself, confidence in scientific method, confidence in Nyaya Darshana, confidence in empiricism, it goes up. You are not the same person you that were there. But that is true for not just like this kind of thing. This is great. The hero journey, Joseph Campbell, if you have heard the name, the hero journey. And this is a challenge for a different reason. Even if the criticism doesn't come, what happens is you have transformed yourself unknowingly, unconsciously to such an extent, you come back to the real world from that universe. And now you are excited to tell people about it, and there are no listeners. Or so, for example, podcast is a humorously, I will say, not just podcast, even the lectures I give, that all that I have done, and most of it is in my book, but I want to talk about it. But in last 15 years, practically, I have possibly only talked 3% of it. The 97% is there because it's technical, because it's that. But that is the aha moments. There are so many aha moments. Like I have 75 error elimination experiments in my first book. There are 75 aha moments there. But possibly say we discuss 3, like Mars and Bhishma Nirvana and Arundhati, because it is easy to explain.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it changes you. And your question was, what is the benefit to the society? One is like, right now we have a very naive modern view, you can say, the single arrow of time, which is to say, as you go back in past, we become backward and archaic. We as a human being and the races, we become like the hunter-gatherers. That's the word used. And as we come forward in time, we become more intelligent, more sophisticated, more technologically savvy. That is the single arrow of time. That is the vision that I would say either the West or the modern science, I don't know when it began, 500 years or 2000 years of West has given us. This tells you that's not the case.
Yeah.
There is possibly a cyclical type of civilizational cycle.
Yeah.
In many ways, you can see the Mahabharata folks in terms of everything, the what you can say, the civic sense, the freedom of thought, disagreements, the sense of morality. It was brutal, right in the face. Like Bhishma could steal the daughters of king and come, but that was accepted. So everyone was okay with it. So, but there is that very clear sense of it. So they, in many ways, they were sophisticated than us. Philosophically, actually, some of the heights that you see, not just India, even the Greek folks, Thales and Anaximander and Xenophanes, the kind of heights they reach, majority of humanity have not reached even today.
Yeah. Taleb has this concept of retrospective bigotteering,
Mhm.
where we go back and we fit our modern day standards of, let's say,
Ha.
ethics onto things that happened in the past.
Correct.
So you will view, let's say, Sita from the eyes of Ma Sita from the eyes of feminism,
Correct.
or some other kind of caste oppression or
Yeah.
something else of that sort.
Yeah.
Right? Not really visualizing life at that time. What was the code at that point of time, but simply putting that down
Yeah.
and saying that they were bad people,
Yeah.
or this concept had to be revised in for modern life as
Yes.
such.
See, right now, let's ask the question to you and me ourselves. Like, now that we are a bit evolved and we have this other perspective, but if it's not there, a person comes with a dhoti and a jabba and a turban or something. What is our immediate impression of that guy compared to what we are wearing stuff right now? Basically, may not be very highly educated, maybe a farmer or maybe a priest, isn't it?
Less sophisticated.
Less sophisticated. And it may not be the case. Now we are comfortable. Like in Bengaluru, you can see that people will come with a bhasma and everything, and the guy is like a genius, but it is our perception. So what Nasim talks about it. It can happen in the other direction also, by the way. For example, take, what is that? Is it Browning's poem? Like the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference, Robert Browning, Frost Browning. So what happened is he actually Robert Frost. So
right.
he wrote as a very simple poem.
Right.
He was going every day in one road, and he said, "Hey, what will happen if I take this?" There was nothing more to it. If you read his thing, but we take a lot more meaning out of it. So sometimes that can also happen.
Right.
But mostly, what Taleb says that's what happens.
So if you were to reboot Indology, let's say an Indology 2.0, with this new approach that you have taken. Right, what would it comprise of? How do we evangelize this Indology 2.0?
How do we do what?
How do we evangelize it? How do we promote it? How do we make it mainstream?
Correct. So one is like to bring it in a textbook. That's what most people think. I am not against it, but I don't think because they saying, oh, they should be brought in textbook. Most of the people, which is to say, I won't do it. Now somebody has to do it.
Right.
My point is, why wait for a textbook? You create your own textbooks, something like this. Keep them ready. When the government is ready, you say, hey, you are ready now? The textbook is ready. Right. What has stopped us from talking about it in the social circles? We have to, I will say it is sexy. We have to make it sexy. I tell people like, what is that big TV serial, Game of Thrones. Okay, I say those people who, I say, did you love Game of Thrones? They say, yeah, absolutely. I say, can you visualize that experience reading a novel? They say, yeah, I have. Some other novel. I say, well, start reading Mahabharata. You will have more kick out of it than even watching Game of Thrones. It will take some time until the person gets grounded. And because of that, many people have started reading Mahabharata. And they come back to me and say that is true. It may take them 1 year before they agree to that. But that happens. So we can change people's perspective. I think for India as a nation, it is going to give people confidence that, hey, our ancestors have done it. For a humanity, see, this is another thing that happens. My study was just by coincidence with that Arundhati Vasishtha. Of course, I was a student of Bhagavad Gita. But if you start studying history of India or Itihas of India, you start understanding the history and Itihas of the world. Just one example is, say, Paul Blanchon Gemshot 1995 paper in oceanography, like sea level rise of 20,000 years with sudden sea level rise 3 times. They call it CRE, catastrophic rise event 1, 2, 3. The one refers to exact my timing, and there is no conspiracy going on between them and me. My work didn't come out until 2009, and I didn't know about that paper. It came only afterwards to my attention because of Dwarka. So CRE1 perfectly matches with Ravana's Lanka getting destroyed underwater. CRE3 perfectly matches with Krishna's Dwarka going underwater 5525 BC. Now, deliberately I did not say CRE2. Plato talks of Atlantis going underwater 9,000 years before him. Plato's time is 2,500 years ago, plus 9,000 is 11,500 years ago. That Paul Blanchon James Shaw paper, the CRE2 is exactly 11,500 years ago, sudden sea level rise. So you start studying Indian Itihasa, by luck, coincidence, whatever you want to call it, you start understanding world history.
I have a random question based on this,
yes.
Right? When we study this text and so on, there are leaps of imagination that one has to do in terms of, let's say, simple things like, I won't say simple things, but things like, let's say, time travel,
Yeah.
or being in multiple places at once. There's a lot of what you would call magic,
Yeah.
right, or imagination that seems like fiction for us.
Yes.
And that breaks our coherence, in the sense that we can't then view it as life as it happened. Right, we kind of think of it as some basically fiction, or this term mythology that is often used to describe these texts and so on, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that there could be like some catastrophe of the sort that you mentioned, and entire understanding of technology, science vanishes, and humanity has to start from a baseline again, and so on? I mean, do you think that's how that's why we haven't invented, let's say, the vimanas and so on?
Okay, so the last one I will say, I don't have evidence for that, but in my subjective judgment, I think that's the kind of thing that happened. But you ask a very wonderful question, like you said, some embellishments, and we say what to think of it, or a time travel. I would split that into three. So think of some of them as like a metaphors, like a Krishna splitting himself into dancing with gopis multiple times.
16,000
Yeah.
forms.
So if say like humorously or realistically say, like 6 beautiful girls are in love with me, even when I am sitting here and they're sitting in their rooms, they're thinking of me and they feel I'm with them.
Right.
I mean, so metaphorically it can be taken. The second one is actually can be thought of as a thought experiment, like the time travel. Do you know that there is a story of a time travel in Bhagavad Puran?
No, I
King
don't know the
Kukudmi,
specifics of it.
whose daughter is Revati, who eventually marries Balram. Okay, so the story is Kukudmi is a king, his daughter is Revati, and when she comes of age, beautiful, and he says, he just goes around and no groom is acceptable to him. He says, not for my beautiful daughter. He says, let's go and ask Brahma. So he, with Revati, travels to Brahma's planet. Okay, so when he goes there, and he says, okay, King Kukudmi, what have you come for? How may I assist you? And he says, well, look at my beautiful daughter. I tried my best. I came to ask you who would be a suitable groom for her on the earth. And Brahma laughs and says, well, it's interesting you came, but only problem with that is, while you have come, and to him, Kukudmi, the experience is like he took just a short time to go there. He says thousands and thousands of generations have gone by on the earth, which is that time travel and so on. And then, of course, he comes and then marries Balarama, and that's the story. Did it really happen? Actually, even our modern science tells us that a physical travel is not possible. Body travel is not possible. I know some of my influence, like Dr. P.V. Vartak, he has traveled in his Samadhi to Mars and Samadhi to Jupiter and all. And you might be thinking, now what's this crazy thing coming? We'll not talk about it. But when people talk about this and people laugh at it, our Indian folks laugh at it, America, they didn't laugh at it. This is the difference. You are asking Western mind. When they even hear from side source, they will ask me and says, okay, what's this thing? I mean, do you have some yoga or something like this? I say, I don't know what it is, but I can show you that is a purely scientific experiment. And we'll not go into that. But so you can think of this as a metaphor. You can think of this as a thought experiment. But there is one more category. Your question is very important. We have to understand the narrative style of Mahabharata, narrative style of Ramayana, and we have to read this text on their terms if you want to understand them. I'll give you a simple example. In the Adi Parva of Mahabharata, if you go, I forgot the chapter, I think it's chapter 75 or so. Just pay attention for a minute. So what it says, now it's some sage to another guy. He says, now I will tell you about the genealogy of Kurus and Purus and Yadus, meaning Krishna's lineage. Okay, he starts there. Then the next verse, he goes as if say, oh yeah, I forgot. Let me start with the first principle. He says, well, as you know, the Brahma once thought of creating the universe and he's created a universe. So he begins there. Then he says, there were many Manus. You know what Manu is? We think very physical. No, it's a Manasa Putra. Meaning some human being created something because he created, and Brahma is a creator. Therefore, that person is considered as a Manasa son, adopted son, mental, intellectual son of Brahma. Right? So that. Now those many Manus, there were Prajapatis and things like that, they said. One of the guys is like this Daksha. Now listen carefully. So this is going on. First, they are going to tell about genealogies of you and me, like human beings. Then he went to Brahma. He talks about this Manu. Then he says this one Daksha had 50 daughters. Out of them, 10 he married to Dharma. 13 he married to Surya. And 27 he married to Moon. Now you know what is happening? This is not actually 50 daughters. There are 10 principles of Dharma, like Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, like this. So he married to Dharma, meaning if you are talking of Dharma, there are these 10 principles. That principles are like a feminized, so to say, and they're married. 13 months of the calendar. So they are married to sun. 27 nakshatras, they are married to moon. Now what is interesting is he says that he goes further and in the same language and he jumps and he says, okay, and then there was this Yayati and his son was this. So he comes down to the ground and starts suddenly saying Pandit Nehru and his daughter was Indira Gandhi and so on. So if you don't know, this is like a Japanese garden. If you've seen a Japanese garden, it is artificially created. But if you walk through it, you don't know when the nature stopped and artificiality began and when again nature begins. It's all artificially created. So this is a narrative style. If you don't understand it, you are going to get confused. Like suddenly you are talking and suddenly a Garuda comes and starts talking to you. Yeah.
So we'll have to differentiate the allegory and the literary tropes from the facts, basically.
Yeah.
But do you believe that there were massive technological advancements in those ages that are somehow not there at this point?
That we may not have it today? I don't know about massive, but yes. I mean, so if you look at the descriptions, for example, they sound like this. I mean, we don't know what technologies they had. If I take astronomy of Mahabharata, Ramayana, think of a Halley's comet. The description in Mahabharata of that comet, they are not calling Halley's comet, of course, is that it is settled in the nakshatra Pushya. Why this is interesting is every 75 years when it comes around, depending on the position of relative position of sun, earth and something, it comes into different nakshatras and goes away, okay, for a few weeks. But Vyasa is saying, and this is consistently they know, that it settles in Pushya. So what happens? A comet is not that visible, like unless it's an apparition. So when it goes back to trace it, which area of the sky it is going, it does go to Pushya. Now we know it. But to have that kind of technology, we don't know even what it is. I mean, our Hubble telescope also loses sight of it after some time. But Vyasa is saying it's settled in Pushya. So that's a fact that can be verified with modern astronomy. But how did Vyasa figure it out? We don't know.
Do you think it's a vision or do you think it's actual equipment?
I like to think it's equipment. I could be wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to wind up with one question, which is that, we've discussed the past quite a bit. If we go 100 years into the future, how do you think the people of that time will look at Ramayana and Mahabharata?
If a disaster doesn't happen, a catastrophe doesn't happen, catastrophe, I would say intellectual catastrophe. No, physical catastrophe, it's not in our hand. But the kind of intellectual catastrophe that happened in the last 200 years with the European intellectual invasion of Indian mind and Indian intellect, then actually, as far as the narrative of Indian civilization is concerned, people will, with all the good stuff that is happening, people will take a lot more pride, courage out of it, and that will reflect, because others are brilliant too, but we are a brilliant civilization. If we put our mind to it, the individuals put a mind to it, I mean, Bangalore is a good place to see. We make big things. California, the Bay Valley, I mean, Indians and Chinese, they have done the stuff. We have a data to support that. If you look at Angus Madison's GDP going back to 2000 years, what does it say? Today we had at the Lit Fest, we had that discussion. Somebody talked about last 2000 years or 1000 years. And I said, extend with Angus Madison to 2000 and go back. We can extrapolate. It's dangerous. But actually there is evidence to show that Mahabharata was more prosperous than what we have today. I mean, we may not have some of their gadgets and technology. So that can come in 100 years time, or people can start India can take the lead. And that is the whole idea. And I will tell you, when I started with Arundhati, that was not my purpose. But once I got it, the only reason I'm talking, I'm not stuck on the date. But basically, this is such a damn factual thing. Yeah. And that gives us the confidence this was real. So if all of these things are real, then some of the things we have a hard time believing in this text must be also real in some fashion. That gives the confidence we can rediscover those things. We can invent things, innovate things, and make us prosperous.
Amazing. So that's a wonderful note to end the podcast on, Nilesh ji. Thank you so much. I know you've had a very long day.
Thank you.
But really, I mean, this was one of those conversations I really, really enjoyed. Hopefully, we have you back on the podcast again. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank you.